drink 250 milliliters of water with my tongue, just like a dog does in 1 minute.
Across the world, some people carry bodies that defy the limits of nature itself. Legs that stretch taller than doorways, hands that can crush with a single grip, and hair that grows far beyond what anyone thought possible. For most, these extremes bring isolation, but for others they become a source of fame, pride, and even beauty. These are people born with body parts far beyond normal, and the last story on this list will stay with you long after it ends. The longest nails. On a regular morning in 1952, Sridhar Chilal stared at his left hand and made a decision that would define the next 66 years of his life. He was 14 when a teacher punished him for breaking a classmate's long nail, declaring he could never understand the patience such growth required. But while that punishment was meant to make him see reason, it planted a seed in Chilal's mind. By 2018, when Chilal finally cut his nails at age 82, they had spiraled and coiled into a cumulative length of 909.6 centimeters, nearly 30 feet on a single hand. But there was something very few people knew about. The weight was unbearable. His thumbnail alone stretched over 6 feet, curving downward like ancient parchment. The nails pressed nerves, rendering his left hand nearly useless. He couldn't sleep on his left side. Opening doors became calculated maneuvers. Yet Chilal never wavered, driven by something deeper than vanity, a quiet defiance, a monument to human willpower carved in keratin. Across the Atlantic, Diana Armstrong understands this peculiar burden. Her fingernails measure a staggering 1,306.58 centimeters combined. She began growing them in 1997 after her 16-year-old daughter Letitia died suddenly in her sleep from an asthma attack. Letitia had always done her mother's nails. After her death, Diana couldn't bear letting anyone else touch them. The grief transformed into growth, each inch a prayer, each year a remembrance. But besides being a record breaker, her daily life requires orchestration. Driving means gripping the wheel with her palms. Picking up objects demands strategy. Yet she's adapted with remarkable ingenuity, using her knuckles where most people use fingertips. The nails have become extensions of her will, not limitations of it. But before Diana, there was Lee Redmond, whose nails reached 28 feet 4 inches before a 2009 car accident shattered both her record and the nails themselves. She had grown them for 30 years, treating each one like a child, applying warm olive oil weekly. When they broke, she described it as losing old friends. Then there was Ayanna Williams, who carried her own 24-foot collection for nearly 3 decades before choosing to cut them in 2021. Unlike the others, her decision came from readiness rather than necessity. She had proven what she set out to prove. The cutting ceremony, performed with an electric rotary tool, took hours. Afterwards, she flexed her fingers freely for the first time in years. But while these people grew their nails intentionally, there were others who had no control over the growth of some of their body parts. Largest hands and feet. Robert Pershing Wadlow was 8 feet 11 inches tall when he died at 22. But the numbers that haunted him daily weren't about height. They were about his hands and feet. His hands measured 12.7 inches from wrist to fingertip, massive enough to engulf a basketball like an orange. His feet stretched 18.5 inches, requiring size 37 AA shoes that had to be custom-made, each pair costing what a family earned in weeks during the Depression. But why were Robert's hands and feet so huge? The cause was hyperplasia of his pituitary gland, a tumor that flooded his body with endless growth hormone from infancy. While other children's bones sealed and stopped growing after puberty, Robert's never received the signal to quit. Every year added inches. Every inch added pain. His legs required steel braces to support his weight. He walked with a cane, not for show, but from necessity. The braces chafed constantly. In July 1940, a poorly fitted brace rubbed an ankle blister that became infected. Before antibiotics could help, sepsis claimed him. But here's what the measurements don't capture. Robert never complained. He toured with the circus not because he was desperate, but because he wanted to help his family and meet people. Children terrified of his size would find him kneeling down, those enormous hands gently ruffling their hair, his voice soft and encouraging. The true tragedy isn't just that Robert died young. It's that he spent his entire conscious life adapting to spaces that rejected his existence, wearing that adaptation like those impossible shoes, custom-made, uncomfortable, and necessary for him to move through a world determined to remain unchanged. But while Robert's story ended in tragedy, a few women with similar issues had it better. The world's longest legs. Ekaterina Lysina's two legs measure 132.8 and 132.2 centimeters. At 6 feet 9 inches tall, the former Russian basketball player turned model possesses limbs that make up approximately 60% of her body. She can't remember the last time she bought pants in a store. Beds are too short. Showers hit her chest and airplane seats are medieval torture devices. But despite all the challenges, Ekaterina radiates defiance wrapped in elegance. After retiring from basketball, she leveraged her proportions into a modeling career, strutting runways where her legs became assets rather than oddities. The Guinness record validated what she'd always known: she wasn't too tall. The world was too short-sighted. Fortunately, her condition isn't pathological. Ekaterina's height comes from genetic lottery. Both parents were exceptionally tall, and her body simply maximized that potential. No tumor, no syndrome, just DNA expressing itself with mathematical precision. Her daughter is already following the same upward trajectory. But before Ekaterina, Svetlana Pankratova held the record with 132-centimeter legs. The Russian woman, also standing around 6'5", faced similar challenges but different times. Pankratova's era offered fewer opportunities to monetize uniqueness. She worked regular jobs, ducked through doorways, and fielded the same exhausting questions. Presently, Masi Kurin has joined their ranks, her teenage legs still growing into a future she's actively shaping. At 6 feet, 10 inches, and still in her early 20s, Masi represents a new generation, one that sees extreme height not as a burden to minimize, but as a platform to build upon. She started a social media presence documenting the realities: custom clothing, airplane struggles, and the constant neck pain from ducking, but also the perspective, the literal and figurative ability to see over crowds, to stand out simply by standing up. They grew tall in a world slightly more accommodating, slightly more willing to celebrate difference. They found communities, online and offline, of others who understood and transformed their unique proportions into identities they controlled rather than conditions they endured. When you watch Ekaterina on a runway or Masi in her videos, you'll see something most people never got to experience: ownership. These women decided their legs were not deformities, but distinctions. They chose visibility over hiding, and turned biology into biography on their own terms, stride by impossible stride. The longest nose. Can you imagine waking every morning to the face that defines you before you speak a word? This is the fate of Mehmet Özürek, a man whose nose measures 8.8 centimeters from bridge to tip. It dominates his face like a geographical feature, the first thing anyone notices, the last thing anyone forgets. Since 2021, he's held the Guinness record for the longest nose, a distinction he carries with the weary pride of someone who never asked for the attention but learned to navigate it. Unlike some others, Mehmet's prominence has no medical name. It's not a syndrome or condition. His nose simply grew larger than typical human variation allows, a genetic quirk amplified perhaps by familial traits, expressing itself in cartilage and flesh. Rhinologists studying him find no abnormality in structure as everything functions perfectly. His sense of smell is normal. The airways are clear, it's just bigger. Growing up in Turkey, he endured predictable cruelty. Children are architects of efficient torment, and an unusual nose provides abundant material. He learned to deflect with humor, to own the jokes before others could weaponize them. By the time he reached adulthood, the nose had become his signature, an involuntary brand that occasionally opened doors even as it invited stares. Although he can afford it now, Mehmet has refused cosmetic surgery. The nose is his, and changing it would feel like betraying himself. He's adapted his life around it, learning which camera angles work, which hats fit, and how to position himself in photographs so the nose reads as distinguished rather than comic. But here's what the record books don't measure: the weight of being forever defined by something you didn't choose and can't change. And speaking of things that cannot be changed, another person has learned to embrace her super large body part. The widest ears. Rümeysa Gelgi stands 7 feet tall, but while that sets her apart and puts her among giants, it is not the only thing that sets her apart. Her ears measure an average of 9.58 centimeters, making them the longest on record for any woman alive. Born with Weaver syndrome, a rare genetic condition affecting fewer than 50 people worldwide, Rümeysa's body developed in ways that defied typical human proportions. The syndrome causes accelerated growth and skeletal abnormalities, stretching not just her frame, but every feature attached to it. While most human ears measure between 6 to 7 centimeters, Rümeysa's exceed this by more than 3 centimeters, giving her an appearance that strangers notice immediately. Yet she's transformed what could have been a source of isolation into a platform for advocacy. She speaks openly about her condition, educating others about rare diseases while working as a web developer from her wheelchair, another necessity born from her syndrome's impact on her bones and joints. Rather than hiding behind her differences, she's built a life where they become conversation starters, teaching tools, bridges to understanding. Her ears aren't just longer, they're symbols of resilience in a body that refuses to conform to standard measurements. And still in line with body proportions that do not conform to standard measurements, this trio have stunned the world with their astonishing mouth part. Tongues that defy biology. Nick Stoberl can touch his nose with his tongue, but not just the tip, the entire bridge. At 10.1 centimeters from tip to closed lip, his tongue stretches nearly twice the length of the average human's 3.3 to 4 inches. When he extends it fully, the effect is almost serpentine, a pink ribbon of muscle that seems to have no end. But here is the weird part. The gift runs in his family. His father had an unusually long tongue too, but Nick took what genetics gave him and turned it into performance. He's appeared on television shows, competed in tongue-length competitions, and even used it in his work as a comedian. Where others might feel self-conscious, Nick found his calling. But he's not alone in the tongue record universe. Adrian Lewis and Radmila Yusupova have also claimed extraordinary tongue length, though their measurements remain less documented in official channels. Then there's Brittany Lacayo, whose tongue doesn't just extend, it expands. At nearly 8 centimeters across at its widest point, her tongue fills her mouth like a thick slice of meat, far exceeding the standard 2-inch width most humans possess. Brittany discovered her unusual feature as a teenager, noticing how her tongue seemed to dwarf her friends in photographs. What started as a curiosity became a Guinness World Record in recent years. She's embraced it with humor, posting videos and photos that showcase what she calls her superpower. No special diet caused this, no accident or injury, just genetics, rolling the dice and landing on something extraordinary. Mouths that stretch beyond imagination. Samantha Ramsdell can fit an entire large apple in her mouth, whole, not sliced, not quartered, but round and intact. Her mouth gape measures 6.52 centimeters and when opened to its full width, stretches 10.33 centimeters across. The average human mouth opens roughly 3.5 to 5 centimeters, making Sam's capacity nearly double what nature typically provides. Growing up, she felt embarrassed by her large mouth, the way it dominated her face in photographs, how people would stare. But social media changed everything. So when she started posting videos of herself fitting improbable objects into her mouth, such as apples, coffee cups, stacked cookies, the response was overwhelming. Millions of views, thousands of supportive comments, and eventually, a Guinness World Record that made her famous for what she once tried to hide. Yet records are made to be broken, as Marie Pearl Zelmer Robinson recently claimed the title for largest female mouth gape with a measurement of 7.57 centimeters in 2024. Marie, like Sam, carries no medical condition explaining her extraordinary oral capacity, just genetic variation pushed to its extreme. She's taken her record in stride, appearing in interviews with the same mixture of pride and bemusement that marks most record holders. But these ladies are not the only ones with a wide mouth gape. There's Francisco Domingo Joaquim, whose mouth stretches to dimensions that seem physically impossible. Known as the widest mouth in the world, Francisco can accommodate a full-sized soda can sideways. His condition stems from naturally elastic facial tissues combined with years of deliberate stretching, a reminder that sometimes biology provides the foundation, but human determination builds the monument. The man who transformed his ears into art. Mark Greenleaf's earlobes don't hang, they frame his face like flesh-colored halos. Each contains a tunnel measuring 11.48 centimeters across, wide enough to pass a baseball through. Standard earlobe piercings measure just millimeters. Mark's measure in the double digits of centimeters, making them the largest flesh tunnels on any male in recorded history. But this wasn't genetics, it was choice, patience, and pain spread across decades. Earlobe stretching, practiced in various cultures for thousands of years, involves gradually increasing the gauge of earrings over time, allowing the flesh to adapt and expand. So what starts as a standard piercing becomes, through incremental increases and careful healing, a gaping void surrounded by a thin ring of skin. Mark began his journey in his youth. Each size increase required weeks or months of healing, careful cleaning, and monitoring for infection or tearing. Too fast, and the lobe rips beyond repair. Too aggressive, and the blood supply fails, causing tissue death. Mark navigated these dangers with precision, expanding his lobes millimeter by millimeter until they reached their current, record-breaking size. But before Mark, there was Guinness World Record holder Kayla Kaiwi, whose lobes are over 4 inches in diameter and claims to fit his fist through them. Kayla works as a tattoo artist and runs the Sin City Body Modification and Tattoo Shop in Hilo, Hawaii. Now, these aren't accidents of biology or symptoms of disease. They're choices, deliberate, sustained, and profoundly personal. Both men transformed their bodies through sustained will, creating distinction where nature provided convention. The world's tallest. Bao Shishun stood at 7 feet 8 inches tall, his arms stretching an astonishing 3 feet 5 inches from fingertip to fingertip when extended horizontally. But the Mongolian herdsman didn't reach this height through some gradual childhood growth. His body suddenly surged upward at age 16, transforming him from an ordinary teenager into someone who would eventually hold the Guinness World Record for tallest living man. Medical experts later attributed his extreme stature to a tumor affecting his pituitary gland, the tiny organ responsible for releasing growth hormones. Unlike others with similar conditions, Bao's growth eventually stabilized, sparing him from the continued complications many face. In 2006, his extraordinary reach proved unexpectedly useful when 2 dolphins at an aquarium swallowed plastic shards. Veterinarians couldn't extract the foreign objects, but Bao's 106-centimeter arms could reach deep into the dolphins' stomachs where instruments had failed. He became a hero that day, his difference transformed from burden to blessing. But across the world in China's Hunan province, Zheng Jinlian faced even more severe challenges. Born in 1964, she grew to 8 feet before her death at just 17. Her hands measured over 25 centimeters and her feet 35, proportions that made simple tasks feel monumental. Gigantism, the same pituitary disorder that affected Bao, had taken a more aggressive course through her body. By her teenage years, she could no longer stand upright. Her skeletal structure couldn't support the weight her condition had imposed. She spent her final years bedridden, her record-breaking height becoming a prison rather than a distinction. But does height in basketball offer redemption for those born into such bodies? Paul Sturgis thought so. At 7 feet 6 inches, the British player pursued professional basketball across multiple countries, his stature finally matching societal expectations on the court. Unlike Bao and Zheng, Sturgis's height resulted from natural genetic variation rather than disease. His parents were both tall, setting him on a path toward extraordinary stature from birth. On the court, he became precisely what coaches wanted. Off it, he advocated for others living in a world scaled for smaller frames, speaking openly about custom furniture, modified cars, and the chronic joint pain that accompanies carrying so much weight on human bones never designed for such dimensions. The largest chest size. Annie Hawkins Turner measured her brassiere size as 102s, a combination of letters and numbers that sounds almost fictional. Each breast weighed approximately 38 kilograms, a mass equivalent to an 8-year-old child hanging from her chest. Born with gigantomastia, a rare medical condition causing excessive breast tissue growth, Annie's body began its dramatic transformation during puberty and never stopped. But what does it feel like to carry such weight every waking moment? Annie described years of chronic back pain, deep grooves carved into her shoulders by bra straps struggling against gravity, and recurring infections in the skin folds beneath tissue that created its own microenvironment. Simple acts like bending forward, climbing stairs, and sleeping comfortably require constant adjustments. She tried sleeping upright some nights, the only position offering relief. But while doctors offered reduction surgery, the standard medical response to gigantomastia, Annie refused. Her breasts had become her identity, inseparable from who she understood herself to be. She built a career around her distinction, appearing in documentaries and working as a fetish model under the name Norma Stitz. And while some saw exploitation in this choice, Annie saw autonomy. She had chosen acceptance over alteration, though whether this choice brought peace or simply resignation remained visible only in the weariness behind her eyes during unguarded moments. The longest body hairs. Yu Jianxia first noticed her unusually long eyelashes in 2013 as delicate filaments extending from her lids. By the time Guinness officials arrived to measure, her longest lash had reached 12.4 centimeters, long enough to brush her cheek when she blinked, and long enough to require careful management every morning. She attributed the growth to spending time in nature, a poetic explanation for what dermatologists suggested might be related to hormonal factors or simply genetic predisposition. Unlike hair elsewhere on the body, eyelashes typically stop growing at about 1 centimeter. However, the Yus defied these biological norms, continuing their relentless extension like vines seeking sunlight. She treated them carefully, avoiding mascara and extensions that might damage the delicate shafts. And when the wind picks up, she feels them flutter against her face, a sensation others might find maddening but which you described as natural. They had become her signature, the feature that made strangers pause and stare. Asha Mandela, on the other hand, carried a different burden. Her hair measured 5.89 meters and weighed roughly 19 kilograms. For Asha, her hair represented spiritual connection, personal history, and identity woven together in those impossible coils. Cutting would feel like amputation. She slept with her hair arranged carefully around her, a ritual consuming 20 minutes each night. But for Ram Singh Chauhan, the struggle was different. His mustache measured 4.29 meters tip to tip, a growth he'd cultivated for 37 years. Each morning, he applied oils, shaped the twin extensions, and wound them carefully around his head for daily activities. The mustache made eating messy and drinking complicated, as every meal required careful navigation of those elaborate tendrils. Yet Ram spoke of his facial hair with reverence, describing it as his life's work, his contribution to his culture's tradition of elaborate mustaches. When walking, he would store the ends in plastic bags when walking, protecting decades of growth from environmental damage. These three people could have simply trimmed away their distinctions and chosen otherwise. Instead, they carry the weight of their choices along with the weight of all that keratin. The largest waistline. What happens when your body exceeds the infrastructure society has built? Pauline Potter's waistline measured 260 centimeters at its maximum, her body mass index reaching levels medical charts couldn't adequately capture. But in addition to that, she held the Guinness World Record for heaviest living woman at 641.5 pounds, a distinction she described with complicated emotions. Her size resulted from multiple factors: genetics loading the gun, psychological trauma pulling the trigger, and years of compounding weight creating its own momentum. Pauline described childhood abuse that made food her comfort, then adolescent bullying about her size that drove her toward more eating. A vicious cycle where the solution became the problem. By adulthood, her body had expanded beyond what most medical facilities could accommodate. Standard scales couldn't measure her. Typical exam tables couldn't support her. Regular ambulances couldn't transport her. Pauline found out through lived experience. She required custom furniture, reinforced floors, and doorways wide enough to permit passage. Standing for more than brief periods left her breathless and dizzy as her cardiovascular system struggled to perfuse tissue across such vast territory. But after claiming the record in 2011, something shifted. Perhaps seeing her size documented so officially sparked change. Or perhaps she simply reached a tipping point. Guinness records aren't lifetime titles. They update as circumstances change. Pauline began losing weight, eventually dropping to around 399 pounds through dietary changes and what exercise her body could tolerate. The legs that failed to stop growing. What happens when the body refuses to stop growing? Mandy Sellers entered the world on February 20, 1975, with legs 5 times larger than an average newborn's. Doctors gave her days to live. She defied them all. The culprit behind this extraordinary difference sits hidden in her genetic code. Gene sequencing in 2013 revealed a PIK3CA mutation affecting half of her body, a discovery that shook scientists. This wasn't Proteus syndrome, as initially believed. Mandy became the first person ever diagnosed with this specific mutation, a condition so unique she jokingly calls it Sellers syndrome. While her upper body maintains a petite frame, her legs grew to weigh 210 pounds, a size more than many full-grown adults. Her right foot stretches 16 inches long and 7 inches wide, while her left foot, a club foot measuring 11 inches, faces backwards. The asymmetry forces her into specially crafted boots costing thousands of dollars. Yet Mandy refused to become a prisoner to her condition. She earned a psychology degree from the University of Central Lancashire and lived independently, navigating the world through crutches and wheelchairs. Even after having her left leg amputated above the knee at 35 due to a life-threatening infection, the stump continued growing, an almost unthinkable twist. But in 2016, pioneering medication finally halted the relentless growth, shrinking her legs by a stone within 5 months. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.